Chapter 19. Underground Highway. Hold your position! Hold your position! Karnak shouted down the underground highway as Bellamy continued driving the tank farther into the unknown. Karnak's order was repeated down the line until it had reached those nearest the tank. Bellamy could see nothing but open road ahead, and with the men firing from the open hole where the turret had been removed, his only thought was to keep moving forward while he had the advantage. Suddenly, a hand began slap, ping him on the shoulder, and he heard shouting, "Stop!" Bellamy fought the urge to ignore the demand and slowly brought his war machine to a stop. "What is it?" He demanded to know why his progress had been halted. "We have been ordered to hold position," shouted one of the men behind him in the tank. Throwing open the hatch above him and standing, Bellamy could see that men were spread to his rear, unable to keep up with the tank's progress. "Well then, we need to secure this area." Looking around, he saw the vast space around him. Each side averaged the length of a football field, and at the far end were docking ramps, some with semis backed up to large doors. Ahead 50 yards, Bellamy saw the tunnels once again narrow down to just the two-lane road. "I'm going to move forward and park where the tunnels narrow. We can set up a defensive line there," Bellamy shouted back over the roar of the tank engine. Noticing that the tank had finally come to a stop, Karnak began surveying the complex around him, marveling in wonder at its size. This was much more than he had expected to find, based only on information that existed from a YouTube video that no longer existed. Looking back to the entrance the tank had made, Karnak saw the reason the turret had been ripped from the tank. The blast door had only lowered halfway before the AT-4 rocket stopped its progress. "I'll be damned," Karnak thought as he gazed on the sight, feeling as if events were beginning to shift in their favor. After taking in the new surroundings, Karnak's next thought was holding on to it. "Sergeant Smith!" Hearing his name called from where he was giving direction to his men securing prisoners, Smith finished and began making his way quickly over to Karnak. "Yes, Commander." "Smith, this is much larger than I anticipated, and I don't want to lose it. Go back to the armory and bring back half the troops who are ready and inform Colonel Marks of the progress. Bring back 4 M250 calibers and whatever else Marks has to secure this area." Karnak feared that wouldn't be enough, but didn't want to deplete the armory of its defensive capabilities. "Will that be all, Commander?" Smith questioned. "Yes, and hurry. I want to move farther into the tunnels as soon as possible," Karnak replied, as Smith called out for a few men to drive the transport vehicles. Karnak then turned his attention to securing the area with the men he had, now that the gunfire in the tunnel had ceased. "I need 3 runners," Karnak called out to men close by. "Yes, Commander," said each man as they appeared in front of him. "You run to Bellamy's location and let them know to secure the progress they have made, and tell that old soldier he isn't General Patton charging the German front lines, and that I said job well done. Now go. You, go find Robert and his men and have them report to me." "Go," Karnak said to the second runner as he looked at the third. "You, find Sergeant Lee and tell him I want his platoon to secure a 100-yard perimeter around the tunnel entrance. Nobody comes closer. Tell him to use non-lethal force if necessary. There are a lot of hungry Americans out there looking for food, and we don't want to kill any who we may be able to help. Go." Karnak watched as the last runner left, wishing he had working radios. "Sergeant Becker!" Karnak spotted the man gathering weapons taken from the former tunnel occupants. Dropping the weapons with the others in a secure pile, Becker ran over to Karnak. Becker had been in the military many more years than Karnak, and had spent most of his time as a supply sergeant before being discharged on early retirement 2 years ago. Becker was also one of the first to arrive at the armory after the EMP had brought the country to its knees. Now Becker had become a very important part of the UCM supply chain, and Karnak was sure he would be the man to organize and catalog whatever may be behind the tunnel's countless storage areas. "Commander," Becker addressed Karnak as he approached. Karnak liked the man, who seemed much more relaxed when talking to him. "Becker, you think you can get me a list of what we have here and organize it all?" "Absolutely." Karnak could see the excitement in Becker's eyes as he spoke. "Great. What is the least number of men you can operate with efficiently?" Karnak asked, knowing manpower was something that was always needed, and at this point, it was for security. I can start with 12, Becker said with confidence. Great. Take who you need and get started. Karnak had expected a much higher number. Sure thing, Commander, Becker said, full of energy as he ran over and started questioning men on their capabilities. Pleased that he had made the right choice to head the supplies, Karnak looked around for Robert. Curious as to why the runner hadn't found him yet, Karnak went in search. Karnak started in the last place where he had seen Robert and his men in a firefight along the right-hand wall of the tunnels from the entrance. There he found his men removing the bodies that remained from the short battle, and he was thankful that none were his own. One thing stood out to him about the dead men. They all had a patch on their shoulders with the letters CERT in bold print. Dismissing it for now and focusing on more pressing issues, he looked around the tunnels for Robert. Karnak watched as about 30 men ran in 2 columns heading for the entrance, with Sergeant Lee leading the way. Relieved that within a matter of minutes Lee would have a perimeter secured, he returned to his search. Private, have you seen Squires? Karnak asked one of 2 soldiers assisting one of his wounded men. Commander, I believe they are at the other end of the platform. The private pointed down the platform that ran along the wall. Each of the doors that looked much like what you would see on a 2-car garage appeared the same with the exception of large numbers painted above them. At the other end, Karnak could see several soldiers gathered. You going to be okay, soldier? Karnak asked the wounded man. Yes, Commander. It's just a flesh wound. Karnak could tell it was much more than that, but admired the soldier's strength as the medic placed a pressure bandage around his arm to slow the bleeding. Next time, try not to lose so much flesh, Karnak suggested, trying to take the soldier's mind off the pain if only for a second. Moving away from the soldiers, Karnak made his way up the 5 steps to the top of the loading docks in front of the large doors. Walking to where the soldiers were gathered, Karnak continued to observe those around him, trying to ascertain a sense of their well-being. The last month had been a major struggle none of them had anticipated, and many had families they hadn't seen since it all started. Family, Karnak thought. That was something he hadn't known since the passing of his mother and father years ago in a car crash. Now, thinking about family, the only image that appeared in his mind was Angelique. The thought of the days they spent together before she went in search of her parents filled his mind, and just as quickly, Karnak suppressed the thought, choosing to focus on what now needed to be done. Nearing the group of soldiers, he could see that one of the doors was opened, and boxes were being loaded onto a semi's trailer. Make a hole! One of the many soldiers gathered around shouted as Karnak approached. The men stepped aside so that Karnak could pass. Where are you taking this stuff? Robert demanded of one of the men wearing a uniform with the same CERT patch on his shoulder that Karnak noticed earlier. Karnak now saw why Robert hadn't reported as requested as he watched him holding the man with his left hand, grasping him by his blouse collar and slamming him against the tunnel wall. Where are you taking it? Karnak stood by one of the boxes stacked on the crate ready to be loaded onto the truck and watched. To the camps. I just deliver supplies, the man said after being thrown against the wall once more. Karnak slung his M4 rifle over his right shoulder and reached up to his vest. Drawing his knife, he cut open one of the boxes in front of him and pulled out a package marked dehydrated peaches. He cut open another box and pulled out a large package marked into beans. Karnak turned and looked through the open door where the crate had come from. To his amazement, it was about 200 feet to the back, with a high ceiling. Except for the open aisle running the full length, it held thousands of boxes similar to those he had just opened. After slamming the man against the wall once more, Robert let him fall to the floor. Take him with the others, Robert said with disgust in his voice. Quickly, 2 soldiers picked him up and carried him away. Robert, come with me, Karnak said as Robert made eye contact with him. The rest of you, secure this area and then move to cover the entrance and rear of the tunnel. Sergeant, make it happen, Karnak ordered a nearby soldier. Robert and Karnak slowly began walking down the loading dock. After a short distance, Karnak asked, What did you find out? Well, that these tunnels are much larger than we thought. From what he said, they run all over the country. That's impossible. How the hell could they build something like that and nobody knew about it? Karnak was surprised by what he had just heard, but from what he could see looking around the area they now controlled, he was starting to think that it could be possible. He heard talk of men driving all the way to Maine. Robert shook his head at the thought of an underground road going so far. I think he was pretty new to all this. The only other thing he said was that they delivered to camps. Camps? Military camps? Karnak asked. Not sure. Robert wished he could have learned more from the guy, but he wasn't willing to take the interrogation beyond slamming a person against a wall. Good work. I'm sure we will find more out soon enough. For now, we have to hold on to this place. We don't know who might be coming to take it back. Very true, Robert replied, deep in thought about what may or may not be heading their way. For now, I need you and your men to take over watch. Position yourselves above the entrance. I sent Smith back for more men and weapons. When he returns, I want 2 50-cal machine guns up there with you. Roger? Karnak knew he wouldn't have to go over every detail of what he expected from Robert. Roger. Robert turned back to the truck where his men were gathered. Liberators, let's move, Robert called out. Liberators? Karnak asked, hearing it for the first time. Yeah. I thought it was fitting given the circumstances. I like it. Carry on, Karnak said with a grin on his face.